Hello and welcome to my review of Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Lolita was published in 1959 and follows creepy Humbert, a self-confessed paedophile who takes a shine to his landlady's daughter, the eponymous Lolita. He agrees to marry Charlotte, the landlady, in order to be closer to the daughter, and sets about foiling his wife's plan to send her away. Fate lends a hand and Part 1 ends with the pervert achieving all his goals. Part 2 follows Humbert and Lolita as they travel across the country, building and breaking a deeply dysfunctional parody of a relationship. Told from Humbert's perspective, the book is dressed by a preface as his statements as he awaits trial and expects death via a heart defect. Clearly the cultural impact of this book is huge, so much so that Lolita has become a byword for illegal sexual activity, so much so that Googling for the book comes with this warning. The subject matter, the reputation of this book will probably be off-putting for some. I was very reluctant to read this book in public, which is a sad state for any piece of literature really, but certainly sad for a book like this one, which does have quite a lot going for it. The back cover describes this as hilarious and insists there's no funnier monster in modern literature than poor doomed Humbert. I think that might be a bit extreme. There is the odd flash of humour, but it's very much of the droll variety rather than the lol, and examples include when Humbert considers fate firmly on his side, but that he sometimes scarpers, leaving a stupid secretary to allow situations to go awry, or describing his nameless neighbour as Mrs. Opposite. Nabokov does write beautifully at times, but in this instance it's difficult, not having read any of his other work, to distinguish what is his style and what is explicitly Humbert's. Certainly the prose, beautiful as it is at times, gets self-indulgent at others, with the example on screen perhaps having a foot in both camps. Beyond the tilled plain, beyond the toy roofs, there would be a slow suffusion of inutil loveliness, a low sun in a platinum haze with a warm peeled peach tinge pervading the upper edge of a two-dimensional dove-grey cloud fusing with the distant amorous mist. There might be a line of space trees silhouetted against the horizon, and hot still noons above a wilderness of clover, and Claude-Lorraine clouds inscribed remotely into a misty azure with only their cumulus parts conspicuous against the natural swoon of the background. There's quite a lot going on here. I mean, the references to the double reference to mist is particularly important because Lolita's full name is actually Dolores Hayes, so the mist haze is a reference to her as well as to the environment. And it gives you a sense of the unseen and the seen, or even the unseen versus the serene, because we're told Lolita travels calmly without any real interest in what's going on. But then at the same time, the language in use is a striking contrast as well, in that you have this sibilance, this slow suffusion. I mean, the loveliness, the sun, but at the same time, Nabokov uses inutil, and if you were sticking strictly with the sibilance, you probably would just use useless. But then you have that sort of giving way to platinum peeled peach pervading. All of a sudden, there's much harsher sounds coming in, and the second half does more or less exactly the same thing: spaced trees silhouetted, hot still noons, a wilderness of clover, but then you have clover, Claude-Lorraine clouds inscribed, cumulus conspicuous, again much harsher sounds contrasting against this sibilance, this duality here that's at work. It's almost like something at play here, and if you look at Claude-Lorraine's paintings, it almost works on three levels, because like the sun will be quite striking, but at the same time it will be diffused through clouds or coming through the branches of a tree or something like that. So it's a striking landscape, as in this text, but it's almost like something is hidden, and what's hidden here is hinted at through that jarring language. That the mist as well is hiding something, and the mist obviously referring to Hayes, Dolores Hayes. So it's almost like her inner turmoil or inner battles really are being played out in the language here. So really very good, but at the same time there are pages and pages of this, and as good as it is, it does become rather wearing. It's that kind of duality as well that sums up much of the book. Everything is written in twos. I mean, the book comes in two sections, being the most obvious example. But then there's the dual meanings shown here in a passage that basically repeats itself. And then you have like the dichotomy between the love and lust, the affection and abuse, or perhaps even just excellent prose versus tawdry subject matter. And it isn't just the language here. This, like the self-indulgent inclusion of so much French tests even Lolita's patience, and she says, "Do you mind very much cutting out the French? It annoys everyone." When I was reading Oscar Wilde, I googled all of the Spanish, but I gave up very early here. Though he is excessive in that regard, at times Humbert's narrative voice is also very convincing. And the opening lines, "You can always count on a murderer for a fancy prose style," sets both the tone for that and establishes this novel as not so much a whodunit, but as a who gets it. Something to keep the intrigue going among all the unpleasant lechery. I mean, the timescales don't work, but Humbert is almost like something of a Hannibal Lecter parody. He's the gentleman, he's an English scholar, but he's also out and out evil. And with half an expectation that this was a parody, the story was really not what I expected at all. I mean, my expectation was that Lolita would resist Humbert, and that fate, his Clouseauian incompetence and weakness, would, with the youngster's keen intuition, thwart his machinations. But the end of part one puts that idea to rest quite brutally. Humbert is unlikable because his crimes are just too vile, because his plans succeed, and because precocious Lolita is just reduced to poor Lolita the victim. In truth, the revelation really quite early on that Humbert has abused orphans rather ends the idea that he might be a likeable villain, even, like page 15 or 16, I think. I mean, Nabokov insists that there is no moral to this text, but I do wonder if there's some kind of thought experiment involved. Like, how reprehensible can you make this character and still have people consider him fondly? Certainly the narrative is, despite the bouts of institutional melancholy, upbeat, especially in Humbert's calculated but inept pursuit of Lolita. The occasional humour found in Humbert's wry observations of life and of himself, and his scathing depictions of his wife, is nothing like enough to overcome the baggage of his wickedness. The second part of the book descends into paranoia, and there are some doubts about Humbert as a narrator. I mean, he has spent time in and out of institutions due to his mental health, and he is also a habitual drug user, yet the preface from Dr. Ray sets this up with a few historical truths to prove its authenticity. And while Humbert suggests his memory is good at times, he also makes clear to his narratee when it is incomplete, or on one occasion both. In truth, there's more reason to doubt Lolita's stories, repeated as they are through the filter of Humbert's rewriting and self-fulfilling viewpoint. Her stories of her prior lovers, for example, could be teenage bluster, or Humbert's invention intended to lessen the awfulness of his act. And Humbert's acts are awful or appalling, one way or the other, never more despicable than when Lolita is crippled with ague and he performs a sex act on her before taking her to the hospital, or when she barters financial restitution before another sex act on him when he visits her school. Nothing here is explicit. It's largely told through innuendo. But despite his lengthy apologia, Humbert remains a monster, explicitly so, describing himself in bestial terms throughout. With Humbert dominating poor Lolita's story so much, is it worth retelling her story as Emily Prager did in 1999's Roger Fishbite? Certainly it raises questions hinted at earlier, such as, what do you really base a story on when you don't know how much of what is written here is even true? Also, Lolita's story, while often elided or backgrounded, is complete. We see her childhood stolen, we see distinct suffering, we see her fighting back and defeating her abuser to an extent, and especially the powerful last few lines, which I won't include here, tell as much of the story as is required. Anything else runs the risk of almost making it gratuitous, almost like a torture porn, or possibly even worse, a parody. I'm not sure I really like that idea at all. Perhaps somebody will offer their thoughts on Roger Fishbite in the comments. In conclusion, with its controversial reputation and difficult subject matter, reading Lolita is not going to be an easy choice for a lot of people. Overcoming those two huge negatives and gaining any enjoyment from reading Lolita may require a lot of positives that I'm just not sure the book delivers. Nabokov creates a convincing character portrayal with delicate and introspective prose of the highest order and occasional flashes of humour, but the lead remains reprehensible, weak, and largely incompetent throughout. The turning point really is Humbert's successful conquest of Lolita, and though the extensive road trip will probably mean more to Americans and other travellers familiar with the geography than it did to me, the second half of this book is particularly heavy going, and even as the finale approaches and the identity of the doomed party comes into focus, the pace remains pedestrian at best. And with the outcome for a lot of characters spoiled in Dr. A's introduction, there's little hope for a cheerful, poetic, or deserved outcome for any of them. I read Lolita to see what the fuss is about, and though it is certainly an interesting experience, For many people, its strengths will be far outweighed by its unpleasantness, making it hard to recommend for any other reason. So thank you for watching this video. If you liked what you see, feel free to like and subscribe. Check out some of the other videos on the channel. And if you don't ring that bell, you'll probably never be notified when I'm next whining about a book you love. Thanks for watching and goodbye.